Shelby, Daren and I are known to be cringy dads who make all kinds of dad jokes. And so I thought, I'm going to have Shelby on the episode. We're going to talk about risk tolerance. What dad joke can I start with? Can I have Daren show up in sunglasses and a white shirt and do some risky business? That would be good.
With New Balance shoes on.
I was just going to say New Balances.
Sam Smith in one of his James Bond songs says risk it all. Can I sing that song to her? But I decided instead we're going to play the board game Risk right now. No?
No.
You do have a good voice, though.
Let's not do that.
I've never heard you sing.
Welcome to It's All Money. Your hosts are right here in front of you. We're checking out It's All Money.
Hey, welcome to It's All Money. Joined today by, I'm Dano Weir, your host. I'm joined today by Daren Blonski, co-host, CFP, and I'm joined, our first guest on the show. Please welcome to the show with a round of applause, financial advisor Shelby Wirick. And Shelby, we are talking about risk tolerance. Don't fall asleep.
So fun.
Daren, did you fall asleep yet?
What?
This is a topic that I have heard of as a layperson before I worked here for years, and it sounds extremely boring, and I never understood how important it was until I worked here, and I thought, you know who knows this well, who deals with this day in and day out as she helps the families of Northern California, is Shelby. So first off, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here, and tell me, what is risk tolerance?
Risk tolerance is someone's sentiment to how they feel with their investments and how those investments are performing, and at what point are they having that emotional instability if their investments are down, or if they're celebrating when investments are up. And it's important for us as advisors to understand where they stand and how that ties into their financial plan. Your tolerance and what you're okay with when it comes to your investments is key when you're looking at your full financial picture, because your score and your level of comfort, whether you're conservative or aggressive, is a key component to your financial future.
I'm so glad you said the word score. So
Can I drop a history bomb here? I feel like I have to put some history in here for people to understand some risk tolerance.
Well, he's paying for the show, so he can drop all the bombs that he wants.
So risk tolerance, like you mentioned score, Shelby. Score is more of a, let's call it a creation of Wall Street, right? So what I always like to tell clients is that first and foremost, we need to understand that Wall Street is a manufacturing business, period. So if we understand that Wall Street is a manufacturing business, we can put every other thing we think about in Wall Street in context of that manufacturing business. Wall Street wants you to invest in things that align with your comfort with big mean word of volatility, up and down. That's what all volatility means, right? How much up and down does it do? Well, over time, there's been a lot of liability of investors being put in investments that didn't align with their up and down comfort. Because of that, Wall Street created these things called risk tolerance. What's their comfort with and tolerance with risk? One of the tools out there is a tool called Riskalyze, is where we get our scores from. But there's 1,000 of them out there. And anyone who's ever had an investment account, they've got these really annoying calls from their advisor or from home office saying, hey, you need to complete and update your annual risk assessment. The reason they're doing that is because we're trying to align your portfolio with your comfort with risk. So if it all hits the fan, we don't get in trouble. It's as simple as that.
So I'm glad you put it that way, because
You just laid it out.
So as I was working with Shelby, because Shelby works on the front end of a lot of, she's in touch with the community, she's in touch with new clients, and so she's working and learning about their situation. And as she and I were working together, I was realizing, and I'm working my way into this business, so I'm understanding it almost from the outside in. I go, wait a minute, this risk score determines like completely where your money ends up, like this one thing. And so you kind of think, I don't really know what people think, but my impression of when you come to a financial advisor is we have a conversation and then you go like, yeah, these are the stocks that I think are cool. And I go, cool, put it in that. But in fact, it's this process of determining how much are you willing to like let it go up and down and be cool with it. And it all kind of hinges on that score.
We call it the puke point, right? So if you're on a roller coaster, you're at Six Flags, and you're riding the wave, right? The markets ebb and flow. At what point are you wanting to get off that roller coaster because you're about to puke, right? And that is a process. So Daren hit on Riskalyze. So when we have a client that
which is a
comes on
product
board,
that we don't necessarily endorse, but yes, Riskalyze.
Yes. So when we have a client come in, we do a very in-depth questionnaire, asking them a series of questions with what are their financial goals, how do they feel about their financial future, how do they feel about the markets, and then we go into a series of scenarios of, hey, here's scenario A, here's scenario B, in a hypothetical portfolio, various gains and losses. How do you feel? And it sometimes feels very redundant, but it's important for us to fine tune that number. So if you think of a number between 0 and 100, 0 being you're very, very risk averse, you are very worrisome of how your money is going to perform.
I don't want to be involved in the market at all.
Yes.
I want the money in my checking account
Maybe
to
some
stay
cash
that
under
way.
the mattress, right? To 100, where let's invest everything in Bitcoin. Super aggressive, right? So
Some would argue that Bitcoin's stable. Some
would. So where do you fall between 0 to 100? And whatever that score is, you're assigned a number, and then that number corresponds to various portfolios that we have. And so
with some room for adjustment, I would imagine.
Absolutely.
I imagine, right? So you're not necessarily slotted. Oh, you have to be here. If there's additional information.
Yeah.
And that's part of where some of the finesse of the job of the financial advisor is to figure out, what someone says on their score versus other information that maybe doesn't fall into the test.
Exactly. The portfolios and the score are not cookie cutter. Each client is unique. Each client's situation is unique and different. And so that's why these meetings are so key before we ever go into any planning or investing, to really have a full understanding of how they feel about their portfolio and making sure that we're in line with them.
And Daren, this is another phrase that seems like it's the same thing. Risk tolerance seems like it would be the same as risk capacity, but it's not.
It is
what
not.
Is the difference?
Sometimes people's risk tolerance is actually really high, but their risk capacity is really low.
What is risk capacity, and how is that different?
Capacity is your ability to financially withstand volatility in your portfolio. So if there's a lot of up and down, but you're really dependent on that portfolio for a monthly distribution because that's what helps pay your bills, we call it a high reliance factor. You have a low capacity for risk. When you might emotionally have a high capacity for risk, it would be incorrect if you're potentially incorrect if you're pulling a lot of investments off the portfolio or assets off the portfolio while it's going up and down. So it's always important to understand that there's risk tolerance, risk capacity, there's reliance on portfolio. There's a lot of different factors. And risk tolerance, the scoring methodology that Shelby's talking about, is one of the tools we use to facilitate communication. And it's communication between what your expectations as an individual is and what an advisor's expectations is. The challenge that has come about of and we talked about this in our last show about retail investors and how this is an institutional world, and now we have 20% of the market being retail investors. The challenge that's been brought into the investment world is a lot of times people go into the market and don't understand their comfort with risk. They go in, they make some money on one stock. I call it the rule of 5, actually. If you take your money and you put it in 5 different stocks, one stock's going to knock it out of the park, and you're going to brag to all your buddies at the barbecue about it. It's the cool one at Christmas party. You need to tell the guy that's your buddy that you really did well or whatever. The second one is going to blow you up. They're going to take half that money back. And then the 3 other stocks, they're going to do nothing. They're going to dud out. So rule 5, I don't care who you are, law of averages, pick 5. Chances are you're going to hit the law of average. Most of us are average, even though our moms told us we weren't.
So then, Shelby, it sounds like there's a potential that someone's risk tolerance score is not necessarily accurate to what they actually are. Because it's possible that someone could think that they are a certain way, but then maybe by other information that they share, or based on other factors they're not necessarily thinking about, maybe their tolerance is actually different than what their capacity is.
You'd be amazed at how many people think that they're either really conservative and end up being really risky, or vice versa. And so the one thing that's really unique about having this specific meeting with our clients is you start to see the behavior and the emotion come out when you answer those questions. And so we take the time to really have those conversations with them and walk them through that thought change too. Because if you have an idea, I'm ready to ride the market and I'm totally aggressive, and then all of a sudden that it's a complete swap in that meeting, then we're really slowing down to help them understand, hey, I don't think you're as risky as you're answering these questions, and here's why.
What's interesting to me, point something out, is most investors, I'd say the average investor that comes to us is actually bipolar, right? They'll have a whole lot of really conservative stuff like all my money in the bank, and a whole lot of really risky stuff like NVIDIA stock, right? Or Bitcoin or whatever, right? And they got these really risky, and we also call that a barbell portfolio. I would say, anecdotally speaking, 70% of people that come into us, they go, here's my portfolio, and it's a bipolar or barbell portfolio. And our job is helping them stretch that risk through the spectrum of risk, and bringing some of that really risky stuff in a little bit, and bringing some really conservative stuff up to keep up with inflation.
Find a happy medium.
Yeah.
So Daren, what are some types of portfolios?
So there's lots of types of portfolios. I'm going to talk generally to I call it vanilla land.
Mega general, super.
Vanilla land, right? So this
if you went to the Walmart stock market, this is what would be on the shelf.
This dollar store. So in vanilla land, your portfolio is generally comprised of 2 elements. One element is stocks or equities. The other element is bonds or debt instruments, right? So the way to think about, I like to think about, to make it really simple, is that stocks are ownership. You get to own different things, and bonds are loanership. You get to loan your money to different things, right? So when you think about it, stocks are historically more risky than bonds because they're more volatile. Bonds are less risky than stocks because they're less volatile. And if you think about it, it makes sense, right? Because if I'm loaning my money to something or someone, I'm getting that money back at some point. When you own, you don't necessarily get it back. Like if that company goes belly up, it's gone. Bye-bye. So you have ownership and loanership. And then how much ownership you have versus loanership has to do with, loanership sounds like kind of a weird word, loanership. So loanership, like you're a loaner or you loan. Yeah. So
you are loaning your money, right? You're loaning your money.
You're loaning your money, right? So
Yeah.
it's loanership. It's not like loanership like you're a nerd and you're by yourself in the corner. It's like loanership. And so we've got ownership and loanership, and then you've got, if you're more risky, you're going to own more things. And if you're less risky, you're going to loan more things, right? So someone who's maybe advancing towards retirement would consider more loans than owning because they want less volatility. Someone who has less risk tolerance might want more loans. Someone who is more risk interested might have more ownership. And that's what you're trying to figure out with different communication tools like risk tolerance, is what's that ownership to loanership ratio and what makes sense for you in your financial needs and what your capacity for risk is. But here's the thing. Most investors invest and think they should love everything in their portfolio, which is a misnomer, because there is one free lunch in investing, and it's called diversification.
So diversification is key because you want to have the balance, right, between ownership and loanership and figuring out what that ratio is. But when you're looking at both of them, how can you make sure that those investments are diversified? So when I say diversified, not just having all of your stocks in just tech, right? You could do that.
And you would have been really happy this last couple of years. Now this is 2024.
Happy. Yes.
August of 2024. 3 months from now, you might be very miserable.
Yes.
Right.
Or in 2020. Dare we talk about that? But right. So
diversifying would be in different sectors of the economy
exactly.
other than tech.
Yep.
I have a shipping company. I have Pepsi. I have whatever it is.
Energy, finance. There's tech, industrials. I mean, the list goes on, right?
A great example would be Starbucks. Did you notice last week what happened to Starbucks when they stole the Chipotle CEO and put him in the Starbucks seat? Stock went up like 25% in a day. That's what happens with ownership, because all those owners are like, yeah, let's go.
We know how you feel about Starbucks.
Starbucks is starting to drive me nuts.
The straws.
The paper straws.
Like, what's up with that? Have you noticed how like you get a paper straw and it pinches it? Yeah, anyway.
You can't even use it.
You can't have your coffee.
You literally can't even
That's
use
why
it.
I have my
I love the planet too, but I do need the straw to work. Let's find a way to make it work for both. Anyways, diversification.
Maybe the Starbucks new CEO will hear this podcast.
Thank you so much.
That would be awesome.
Hope.
Right?
I so hope.
Changing times.
So you need something. I've heard you say this before. You need something in your portfolio that you hate.
Yes, exactly.
And that's diversification.
Mm-hmm. And
because why?
Well, there's when you look at diversification, yes, you can have the different things that I mentioned before, right? Different types of investments, whether it's financial, it's tech, et cetera, healthcare. But we also look at not just stocks in funds within the U.S., but also international. We look at counter-cyclical, so alternatives, so futures and gold. Other things like that are help when you're looking at the total picture of your portfolio and not having it so concentrated in one area.
Most investors are concentrated in U.S. stocks. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest, we talk about barbell portfolios. So typically we'll see portfolios come in a whole bunch of money in cash and a whole bunch of money in U.S. stocks. In this day and age, they're usually growth stocks, right? Because that's what's been going up. We've had the Magnificent Seven, and now they're going back up. Like there's this part of me that's just, come on, let's get the diversification working here.
I found this incredible slide. It's from a study from Yale. This is also coming from the Journal of Financial Counseling and Planning. And they basically, I know, Daren, you read that, right? You read
of course. When I get my Journal of Financial Counseling and Planning, I sit there and just read. And
so if you're listening to this is a graph looking at, it's comparing through their survey. They surveyed people and they compared the sentiment towards whether they were unwilling to take any risk in comparison to what the S&P actually did. And without getting too detailed for our audio audience, essentially, in the 80s, you had up to 50% unwilling to take any risk in their portfolios. And then that number steadily drops.
You call that steadily? That doesn't look steadily.
Well,
it falls off a cliff.
Yeah.
Falls off a cliff. Sorry, falls off a cliff. In comparison to what the S&P was actually doing. Then as the S&P is rising through the late 90s and into the 2000s, people are starting to you're able to see the change in people's sentiment towards whether they aren't willing to lose anything in their portfolio. In particular, in 2008, on this particular graph, you can see that suddenly they're unwilling to take any risk again. So I only show this to say, and I had this conversation, wanted to have this conversation today because it's such a crystal example of how emotional this whole thing is, right? It has nothing to do with numbers. It has nothing to do with the fundamental aspects of the company. It has to do with, are you okay? Mm-hmm. Not like, hey, what does the calculator say I should do with the money? No, are you okay with the value going up and down? is your psychology going to be able to handle losing 50% of your portfolio for the chance to make 30? Can you, knowing that piece, and that's such a huge piece, in fact, that might even be the only piece, is just mind-blowing to me. Am I wrong?
No, you're spot on.
I often say that when we're talking about how we provide value as a financial advisory firm, there's all these fancy charts, all these fancy computer systems we use. I often say that what our clients really value most from us is they want to know they're okay. Mm-hmm. Whatever that means to them. And our job is to figure out, are they okay? Mm-hmm. And to, with the highest degree of probability, say, you're okay. That's an emotional thing, right? Investing is emotional. And the minute we try to bifurcate that and not acknowledge the emotional component, we've begun to lose.
Mm-hmm. So when you're sitting down with a client, Shelby, and you're having the conversation, you're seeing them as a person, you're getting to know who they are, they matter to you, but they're also in a way giving you the back of their baseball card. And so I had you pull up a couple of scenarios and summaries of what you might see from someone that might eventually affect their risk profile. I'm just curious if I wanted Shelby to share these to say, you probably don't think about yourself in this way, but this is in fact what can affect what your financial plan actually is.
Yeah. So, I mean, gosh, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, where there's so many different types of clients and it's not cookie cutter. An example of one person would be someone who is recently retired. They're receiving a pension, getting Social Security, has multiple properties, so high net worth. They're not necessarily reliant on their specific portfolio. Their goals are to travel, have some remodels in mind for some of the properties. Generational giving is huge. They may tell us that they're okay with volatility. But then, during meetings, we do a portfolio review, and then all of a sudden, maybe the portfolio is down a certain percentage, and you start to see that anxiety kind of kick in. And we'll take the time to talk about that. Is where they're currently at okay? And if not, let's reassess. But it's important to know, we have these check-ins frequently to understand that there's that risk tolerance is still accurate. And if it's not, how do we adjust? Should we adjust? And if so, how do we do so that we're matching that level of emotional, I don't want to say security, but emotional, okay.
You know who FOMO and YOLO are?
Sure know about YOLO.
FOMO and YOLO, right? So this is really just a conversation about FOMO and YOLO. And what's interesting is we actually find it more difficult to keep clients invested appropriately when the markets are ripping high. Mm-hmm. Because when it's ripping high, everybody's got FOMO, fear of missing out, and they want their money invested in the hottest stock, and they want to make all the money. And we're like, whoa, time out, we got to diversify. And then there's YOLO, you only live once. And people, that emotion of people saying, oh, I'll put all my money on Nvidia. How do you pronounce that again? That's how they ask it to us often.
Okay, give me another client. What's a totally different scenario?
Let's see. Client B. This person comes in, tells us that they're really risky, have $1 million in investments, single. They're taking Social Security, but are going to need to be, that's not enough. They need to be reliant on their portfolio. So do a full risk assessment with them. And they're saying, let's ride the wave. Fun fact though, you can ride the wave, but if you're reliant on that portfolio, that's maybe something we should consider.
And that would be an example of risk capacity being out of whack with your tolerance.
Exactly. Risk capacity and tolerance are off. So let's dig in deeper to talk about that. So all of those factors are key when looking at the bigger picture. And are you going to be okay?
And as you're describing this, the reason why I wanted you to read this to me, it almost sounds like your doctor talking about a patient who's presenting with a condition. I've got a 55-year-old female. They're presenting with X, Y, and Z symptoms. If you're wondering what a financial advisor does, among many other things, it's the upfront work in getting to know you, what your goals are, what your capacity is, because at the end of the day, at least I can speak for this firm, Sonoma Wealth Advisors, we want you to feel okay. We want you to feel good. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help you win. We're a fiduciary. Determining what some of these elements are can be very, very helpful and can ultimately, we hope, lead to your success is what we would hope.
I want to just drop back on one point because you made the mention of fiduciary. And I think that's so important because everything we've talked about in this episode is about vulnerability emotionally, right? Like we're getting really vulnerable with our clients and them, and they're talking about how they feel, how they think. And when you really stop and think about it, the idea that this industry's evolved in such a way where you get them vulnerable with the client and then they flip a financial product on you as a brokerage would do, it really makes you question things. Like that's why it's so important if you're going to have an advisor, to have an advisor that has to work in your best interest by statute. Because otherwise you're creating this massive conflict and you're putting yourself in a vulnerable, dangerous position. Because now that you've opened up with that advisor, they can sell you anything they want.
I think also building that trust and answering the question, are they working in my best interest? And are they in line with my goals? Because if those questions aren't answered, then that's something to reconsider.
I can't believe we did it. A whole episode on risk tolerance. Eyes are open.
Wow.
Hopefully people aren't sleeping.
She had one cup of coffee. We hope that today's episode was educational for you. It's something that seems, again, extremely boring, and yet I was stunned to find out. I think this might be the core piece to it all. So, Shelby, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Shelby.
This content was produced by Fermata Advisors LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. DBA, Sonoma Wealth Advisors. The opinions expressed by Fermata Advisors LLC on this show are their own. All statements and opinions expressed are based upon information considered reliable, although it should not be relied upon as such. Any statements or opinions are subject to change without notice. Information presented is for educational purposes only and does not intend to make an offer or solicitation for the sale or purchase of any specific securities, investments, or investment strategies. Investments involve risk and, unless otherwise stated, are not guaranteed. Information expressed does not take into account your specific situation or objectives and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for any individual. Viewers and listeners are encouraged to seek advice from a qualified tax, legal, or investment advisor to determine whether any information presented may be suitable for their specific situation. Past performance is not indicative of future performance.